Wait, what about weird?
Hi, Echo here. Before we get into this episode, I just wanted to give a brief warning that all episodes within our Jonestown series include discussions about sexual assault, suicide, animal abuse and death, child abuse, homophobia, racism, emotional manipulation, murder, and cult activity. Many of these topics will be disturbing to hear about, and if listening to any one of these topics disturbs you, please skip this series and enjoy any of our other episodes. Thank you. Hi, I'm Echo.
And I'm Elena, and this is our podcast, What About Weird? A podcast where we discuss all things weird from cryptids and aliens to strange science and unhinged history.
And this week we are going to be going into our part 2 of Jim Jones and the People's Temple. And just a little recap from last time, we talked a lot about Jim's childhood and
selling spider monkeys.
Yeah, how he fucked up his friend Don Foreman, how he met Marceline Baldwin, his future wife, when he was working as an orderly at a hospital.
Everybody.
Yeah, how he has like this weird interest with religion and ends up like after like bouncing around from job to job, he finds his purpose within the church, except for the fact that he's actually an atheist and he's really just doing it to manipulate people. He does actually a bunch of like really good shit, but of course not without also like emotionally and physically manipulating others.
Adopted like 72 children.
Yeah, to build his rainbow family.
One of each race, like collecting Pokemon.
Yeah, he builds this church in Indianapolis called Community Unity that ends up becoming the People's Temple. He gains like almost 2,000 followers, but then at some point he decides that he wants to go to Brazil for a couple of years and, I don't know, fuck around there for a little while.
Because that's where he can find the spider monkeys.
He comes back to the Indiana church and it's completely fell apart, and now he's really only left with like 75 to 100 close members of the church, and so he
all
decides,
of them are his adopted children.
and he decides to kind of uproot his life and move the People's Temple to California. And Archie Imes, who is very loyal to Jim Jones, is still a leading member of the church. At this point, they move and decide to settle near Ukiah, California. And of course, we know at this point, Jim Jones is kind of getting paranoid. He's getting maybe some real death threats, but a lot of fake death threats.
Where is Ukiah in, like, relation to everything else? Because I'm not from the West Coast. I just know I know where Berkeley is. I know where San Francisco, LA, and San Diego is, and everything else I have no clue.
Yeah, it's really nowhere near any, like, major cities.
Yeah, it's like a third of the way up towards the northern border.
So this is on purpose. That is basically in the middle of nowhere, California.
Oh yeah,
is because like we know at this point
you can do cult shit in the middle of nowhere.
Well, he's really obsessed with nuclear warfare. Like he's afraid that the nuke is gonna drop at any moment, and he basically read on like top 10 best places to live in the world if a nuke is dropped, and Ukiah, California was one of them. And so he picks up and moves to like this tiny ass town near Ukiah for this purpose.
But they're still close enough to the city they can get a lot of people, I guess.
Yeah.
Recruit. Because you'd think if they really didn't want to get hit by a nuke, you'd go to like, I don't know, Minnesota or Canada.
Yeah, I don't know. But apparently it was on this list, and they had this kind of thought that like California's going to be...
just in Cosmo, he read it, he was like, oh, that seems like a good idea.
Basically, he thought California was going to be more accepting. And, you know, he has a desegregated church. He wants it to be, like, open to everybody. He, you know, is trying to gain a bigger black population. And essentially, like, he's like, California is going to be an open place for this. But what they don't realize
is gold in them there metaphorical hills.
It's a tiny fucking town. It's still extremely racist. All this acceptance that he's looking for in California, also, he's not going to find it here.
1959, right? Or like 62?
Yeah, no, I think 60, in the 60s, early 60s.
Yeah,
So
we're still racist today in big cities. So
yeah, and he's just moving to another small town that's like not great. He moves to this area where like apparently is like the safest place that he can be for nuclear fallout. And this is actually in 1967. So he convinces his most loyal followers in the Indianapolis church that the nuclear holocaust is coming and that they need to move. And so this uproots like a ton of people. They like sell all of their possessions, they leave their jobs, and they follow him to California because they think that this is the safest place for them to be.
And all these people have sold like all their stuff and given all of their money to the church at this point already. So they like need to follow the church anyway.
Right, because they've already given up everything for this man. Like, they will lose everything if they decide not to follow him.
And also, I just want to point out, because he's already been like, hey, stop spending time with your family and start spending more time with me and the church, they're already losing connection to their family. And by moving them the other halfway across the country, they're losing even more connection with their family.
And he's literally splitting up family. That 7-year-old boy, Jim Cobb, and his mother, they decide to move without Jim's father because Jim Cobb's father is like, I don't believe in uprooting our entire life to follow some church. And so it's literally just Jim Cobb and his mother that move out there with the church. And then like they finally convince Jim's dad to move with them because he's like, fine, because I want to be near my son.
Yeah.
But like that wasn't always the instance. Like there's so many instances where he completely uprooted tons of families. And
if your church tells you to stop spending time with your family, give up all of your worldly possessions, and move across the country, it's a cult. Get out.
And so the members that followed him to California, there were about 140 of them, were so loyal that Jim Jones really
How loyal were they?
He started really showing who he actually was. He tells them he doesn't actually believe in God. He starts poking holes in the words of the Bible. And he even starts claiming that he is a prophet, a God among men. And then most members actually still stayed, even though he's confessing all this stuff. I mean, he
did all this good shit. Right?
Yeah, and they're so devoted. They've moved they've given all of their lives. They've left their families. They've uprooted him and followed him across the country. They have no choice but to continue to have faith in him. Yeah, I was going to say,
they're so reliant on him.
Right.
They have to. They have to rely on him and continue. Even if they're like, I don't believe you. They're like, well, I have to follow you because I've done everything. I've cut all these ties. What option do I fucking have?
Right. And he even starts doing this thing where, like, that really bothered a lot of the elderly church members that were, like, deep-rooted in Christianity, where he would literally, like, stomp on the Bible and, like, cuss. Say, like, lines from Karl Marx Manifesto and all sorts of shit. But at this point, a lot of people were hooked, and they do genuinely start to believe that Jim is a god among men. He is healing people. He's speaking in tongues. He's, like, doing the Lord's work in his community. And so, like, a lot of people end up staying, even though he's kind of flipped a 180 and said, I don't even believe in God. I am God.
I mean, I was joking about it in the last episode, but he was like, I don't believe in God, but unless I am God, then I believe in myself.
Yeah, pretty much.
So by that default, I do believe in God.
Marceline ends up getting a job as a social worker, and then Jim starts teaching classes on history and politics, in which he invited some of his students to actually be members in the church. And then he also told some of his members to attend his classes so that they could get high school diplomas. So he's kind of mixing, you know, his church life and his teaching classes. But he also used these classes to promote his own viewpoints, and he's using it to indoctrinate new members of the church. And becoming a teacher in a small community also helped build his reputation within this community. And he would have access to
just a lot more people, because that's just something people do, and you have influence in that sense. So you'd be like, hey, you seem to be struggling, like, socially and this, that, and the other. How about you come to this church with me? It might help.
Yeah, and then Jim Cobb at this point is, like, developing into, like, a young man, and he is a very talented athlete and was likely to get several athletic scholarships to have a career as an athlete. But when Jim Jones started preaching against sports because of their violence and their competitiveness, he ultimately pressured Jim Cobb to give up on his goals, meaning he would never have a career as an athlete despite how good he was.
Jeez.
Yeah.
And also, you can't be better than other people. That's for me. I'm the only person that can piss over this roof. The only sport he recognizes is roof pissing.
Yeah, and he would do this stupid shit where he was like, oh, by the way, I played basketball. I played baseball. Like, I'm actually pretty good at sports. I just don't believe in them.
Well, you know what? I don't believe in your mom.
And then at this time, they were low on funds because...
Really? I wonder why.
I mean, these people have to, like, get jobs after uprooting their lives, and a lot of them still don't have jobs, but, like, you know, their finances are all tied to each other. So being a little low on funds, they often started farming their own food. They even built their own pool inside the church that they were building, which they thought it was really interesting. Like, he would end up doing baptisms in the church pool. And
I mean, I've seen that before.
Of course, like, it's just a bunch of random people constructing their own church. And so...
None of these people are contractors or builders. They're just like, I don't know, and they're fucking around. They're just fucking around, just like, well, I hope this isn't a load-bearing beam.
Yeah. And so they're kind of just, like, doing it and hoping for the best. But they're putting in things upside down on accident and having to redo stuff. And, like, it takes them, like, way longer.
They're
and
actually
it's a ton of effort.
measuring in inches instead of feet.
Right.
They end up with a 3-inch door and nobody sees anything wrong with it.
So they finally, like, get their church built with a pool inside. And they're kind of, like... building their own place on this property that they got in Ukiah, California. And around this time, when they're first getting started out and settled in California, is when Tim Stone, who is incredibly important for this story, starts popping into the picture. Tim Stone is a highly educated, very prestigious local attorney who began attending People's Temple services, and he was absolutely captivated by Jones. He was willing to give up all of his expensive art books and even his beautiful Porsche to serve the People's Temple. Him and his young wife, who was 13 years younger than him and only like 19 at this time.
So okay.
Yeah.
He's like, what?
She's 19,
She's 19.
And he's 32.
Okay.
So, like, okay, yeah. Anyways, her name is Grace. They decided to move closer to the church. And Tim basically promised Grace that they would serve the church for a year, and then he was going to run for Congress, and it was all going to be good.
It's going to be good. It's going to be golden. Yeah. We're definitely not going to end up in some forest somewhere drinking Flavor Aid.
They would do this service, and then he was going to run for Congress, and their life was going to be great. And they would only have to, like, give up all their worldly possessions for this year. And so Grace reluctantly agreed because she loved him, but honestly was a little weirded out by Jim Jones' healings, prophecies, and supposed clairvoyance.
As you should be.
And so Tim ended up becoming legal counsel for the People's Temple, and even Jim Jones himself. Jim Jones...
They're gonna need it.
Yeah, over time began requiring more and more from him. More and more commitment with each day, and even forcing him to write essays that denounced his previous views on socialism. And it's worth mentioning that at this time, the People's Temple...
When you say his views, you mean Stone's views on...
Yeah,
being like... Because he was probably like, oh, socialism's not good, and now Jones is like, you have to write and say, I will not say socialism is bad 100 times on the blackboard.
Pretty much. And it's also worth mentioning that at this time, the People's Temple adopted an invitation-only policy for its members, meaning that people that were joining the church felt like it was an honor for them to join such an organization. And
then it kind of makes it a bit more competitive for people to get in and slightly more desirable.
Yeah, because you have to be invited.
Think how, like, club grocery stores are, or, like, events and stuff seem so much nicer and higher end or like desirable to go to than
that you have to have like a membership for
stores or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so Around this time, Jim also begins preaching about sharing the love, which basically meant telling people to have sex with others, young or old, black or white, married or unmarried. And he adopted this for himself, whether Marceline liked it or not. So Marceline's family, the Baldwins, would often find her crying at night due to some of these issues with her husband. So a woman named Caroline Layton and her husband joined the People's Temple. Caroline became Jones's assistant and they began sleeping together. And he would literally tell her that she was the first person he ever loved, and they had this crazy romance. They were into each other. He treated her more like his wife than he treated Marceline.
Yeah, Marceline in the background this whole time is just I knew I should have gotten a divorce 7 years ago or whatever. This poor woman.
And of course, because he didn't want to be a hypocrite, he starts preaching, oh, everybody should just sleep with each other. I'm doing it, everybody should just sleep with each other.
Yeah. See, I'm one of the cool kids. You too should be doing it.
And even his son Stephen would hear him having sex with Caroline, which caused a lot of inner turmoil from him. On one hand, he knew what his father was doing was wrong, but on the other hand, he almost felt as if there was something wrong with his mom because he saw his dad as such this wonderful man. Why else would he cheat on her unless there was something wrong with her? And so when Caroline began spending every holiday with the church instead of with her own family, slowly her family members began to trickle into the church just so that they could be together. And since Marceline was so distraught most of the time, Jim Jones decided he wanted to get her some psychiatric help. But this wasn't without some darker motives.
She has a case of hysteria.
Pretty much. This initial psychiatric evaluation and help would later mean that Jones could dump her in an asylum if he wanted to. So Jim even went so far as to try and convince Marceline's family that she was crazy and needed to be institutionalized.
Says the guy who's been locking people in rooms for the last 25 years.
But fearing that what they might do to his daughter, the Baldwins ended up taking a road trip from Indianapolis out to California to assess the situation. And when the Baldwins arrived to the People's Temple, Jim Jones continued to persuade them. He even told them that Marceline had tried to take her own life, even though she hadn't. Several church members even agreed with him, basically because he told them to. But in private conversations with Marceline, the Baldwins were able to tell that Marceline was not crazy, nor did she have any suicidal ideation. And through enough arguing, the Baldwins were able to convince Jim to keep her out of the asylum.
Yeah, this poor woman's probably just feeling super trapped right now and confused.
Honestly. She, did not end up in the marriage that she wanted to end up in.
No. And he deceived her from the beginning.
Yeah, Jim Jones would even tell his own children terrible things about the mother. He was uplifting Caroline all the time, this, secretary that he was sleeping with. And then he started spending
his secretary.
Yeah, he started spending every single night with Caroline under the pretense that he was going to a meeting. And then he also replaced Marceline during family outings and weekend trips. Marceline, finally having enough, decided that divorce was the only option. Jim's own mother even decided to help her get the divorce and take the children with her. But one of the children decided to, tell the plan to Jim. Basically fucking tattled on his mom.
But he's a kid. He doesn't...
Right.
He's having this pushed into his brain of,
yeah.
I am... Jim Jones is God. You must listen to him. If you're a filthy, rotten, person, if you don't.
Not, but, imagine as, a kid, you don't want your parents to split up.
Yeah,
you are going to try everything to keep your parents together. So he tells his dad, hey, mom's going to divorce you. And so Jim started telling the children again that their mother was crazy when she asked to leave, and they must not go with her. And he basically, convinces his children that, if they go with their mom, their lives are going to be, horrible because she's insane and she's going to kill herself and all this crazy stuff. And he did this because he knew that if the children refused to leave with her, then she would end up staying and abandon her plan to get a divorce. So when Marceline announced that she was going to get a divorce and asked the children to come with her, every single child said no. And
because they were manipulated and because they didn't want their parents to split up, because they don't understand how abusive their father is.
Exactly. And so just as it was suspected, Marceline decided to stay. And there was even one instance when Marceline was like, hey, I'm going to leave you, where Jim literally told her, like, I will, like, kill you and the children if you leave. And so she felt like she couldn't leave.
I mean, that's frightening, but it's understandable why she felt like she couldn't leave.
Mm-hmm. And then around this time, Jim also became addicted to drugs. People would often see him shooting up strange substances.
This is your cult leader on drugs.
Yeah. And he would always claim that he was on, like, vitamin B12, that it was just vitamin B12. But they often rendered him unable to speak. And his drug use became so severe that he would need to start wearing sunglasses all the time to hide his red eyes. And if anyone questioned him about the sunglasses, he would exclaim that the power inside of him was so great that it was shining out through his eyes, and anyone that looked at him directly in the eyes might go blind or even die.
So he's just cool guy Medusa?
Pretty much. And at this point, so what he's taking is he's taking amphetamines to stay awake, because he's doing so much at this point, organizing this community and trying to keep all these people together and being a manipulative asshole and, like, sleeping with a bunch of people. And
being a manipulative, cheating asshole takes up so much of your time and energy. I don't know how he could do it.
And when he's giving sermons, he would hold meetings with, like, his people for so long that they would pee themselves because he had locked them in the room.
Again with the locking people in the room. Yeah. I told you it was going to come back.
But then, of course, he had a bucket behind the stage that he could piss in.
Again with the pissing.
And then the members would have to stand, but he got to sit on a couch.
It's just like laying on I just picture him, like, laying on a couch, like a stoner with his sunglasses on. Everyone standing. He's like, you ever just think about how God is me? And I'm God, and all of you can go fuck yourselves because I have all of your assets, and you should give all of your money to me because fuck you. And, like, what if we are the ants, man? Just on all of the drugs on this couch.
And so he was taking, like, all of these amphetamines to, like, keep going throughout the day, but then he would be wired at night, and he's still suffering from insomnia at this point, so he would take Quaaludes.
Still having the snake dreams, are we?
His drug addiction became so bad that once he took 13 Quaaludes, which is considered to be an overdose amount, and then he told Marceline what he had done. She rushed to his aid, filling him with cold coffee and keeping him awake until she knew he was okay. But he's just, like, not even caring how many drugs he's taking at this point. Like, he's taking a shit ton of drugs.
He's like, I am God, and drugs are me.
And Tim Stone has become, like, so engrossed in the temple at this point, way more than he ever thought he would. He was granted a ministry position, and then also became a board member for the Disciples of Christ, which was the denomination that the church was under. The religious organization started to gain, like, even more members. And then also the Disciple of Christ were an affiliate with the DA, and now they have, like, official church legal counsel. And this often dissuaded anyone from raising legal actions against Jim Jones or the People's Temple. And even though Tim and his wife Grace really loved each other and had the happiest marriage before the People's Temple, under the temple, they were having a ton of issues. And so Grace decided to stay with the People's Temple because she had found friendship in it. And then, of course, Tim is, like, now a leader within the temple. And Jim was, like, claiming that there were so many women obsessing over him and wanting to be intimate with him that he asked Tim to relieve him of some of that burden. And so that is part of the reason why him and Grace's relationship is falling apart, is because
I'm just so hot, your wife can't stand being with you. She wants to be with me.
He tells Tim, you need to sleep with some of the women that want to sleep with me to lessen my burden of having to sleep with all these women.
I'm just so hot. I'm just so popular. Woe is me. I need you to help take some of this off of me. Oh, woe is me. Commit adultery because I'm so tired from all of these Quaaludes.
And so he tells Tim to commit a selfless act and self-sacrifice himself by sleeping with a woman of the church who had insecurities to make her feel better about herself. And so
that just seems like targeting and abuse and just all the bad things. Oh, you're insecure, I'm going to target and manipulate you.
And so Tim sleeps with this woman named Sharon Amos, who, like, isn't quite as conventionally attractive as Grace is and has insecurities. And so he starts sleeping with her to make her feel better about herself, just like Jim suggested. And then Jim would go to tell Grace, Tim's wife, that he was, like, sleeping with Sharon. But he wouldn't tell her that he was the one that initially, like, started it.
Sharon!
And so he's, like, basically trying to divide their marriage and play both sides. Well, like, I'm the good guy.
Look, I'm the good guy. I'm helping you find other women. I'm the good guy. I'm telling you that your husband is cheating, even though this was my idea.
Finally, when she was 21 and her husband Tim was 34, Grace fell pregnant with a child. She gave birth to a healthy baby boy, John Victor Stone. And when the birth certificate came in the mail, it clearly stated that Tim Stone was John's father. However, the child did look a little bit like Jim Jones. Now, there is, like, literally no evidence. We do not know.
Does Tim Stone look like Jim Jones at all? Or does the wife look like Jim Jones at all?
It really could have been either of their kids. Like, it really could have. It looked kind of equal. Like, it could have been either of them. And that's the thing, is, like, Tim Stone even wrote a book, but he does not say whether or not that kid was biologically his or if it was Jim Jones's. We literally have no idea.
Unless we were to DNA test him, which is going to be a whole button, you know.
The custody over John Victor Stone between, like, Tim and Jim is a huge part of the reason why this case ends up how it does.
Oh, jeez.
So this child is, like, basically the loaded gun for this case.
So I'm assuming there's like you said, there's a chance that either one of them are like, it could be my son. Neither one of them are like, this isn't my son.
Right.
Because they both...
Because, like, we assume that Grace probably slept with Jim, but it's also possible
or that Jim, like, took advantage of her.
Yeah, like, he could have, like, straight up sexually assaulted her, or, like, she could have never slept with him.
And he's just claiming that, and, you know.
Yeah.
And it's her word against everyone else, against his or whatever.
And so the birth certificate comes in the mail, and it says...
And I'm also assuming it's just, even if Jim didn't, like, assault her or sleep with her or whatever the case may be, he still wants power over that family and over the kid.
Even if it's not his kid.
Yeah, even if there's
another way to have control.
Way. Yeah, it's just... They just... Control. He's all about control.
And so the birth certificate comes. It says that the father of the child is Tim Stone. However, Jim Jones literally writes a letter that he forces Tim to sign as if Tim had wrote it himself. And it was a legal document stating that the child was actually Jim Jones's. Because I basically claimed, like... Tim Stone...
did not have sex with that woman.
Was not able to have children of my own, but I wanted to start a family with my wife. And so I thought that, you know, if I was going to have anyone sire my child, I wanted, like, the most amazing, handsome, wonderful, selfless man in the entire world that I've met to sire my child, and that was Jim Jones.
And also, Tim Stone, am a stinky little weenie.
So it's basically like, you know, it's this letter that Jim Jones wrote, but then he makes Tim sign
under duress, probably. Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, like...
What cult was it where they made him sign a bunch of blank papers?
This one.
It was they made him sign, and they'd fill him out. I was going to ask if maybe this was the start of that.
And so, like, Tim signs this document, and he claims he thought this was just going to go into a safe, and it wasn't going to be a big deal later. And he didn't even tell Grace that he had signed this document that legally bound the child to the church and Jim Jones forever. Even though Jim could sleep with whoever he wanted, he was trying to promote other people in the church to have extramarital relations, but they had to get permission on who to sleep with. who to live with, or basically anything that they could do with their marriages or their extramarital love lives. So if Jim didn't approve, you couldn't do it. So
So I know someone that, sorry, can I go off on a tangent relating to this? I know some people that went to a Bible college, and one of the rules of this Bible college was you couldn't like see anybody or date anybody or anything like that without the permission of both families and the permission of the church. And like you had to specifically ask and explain why you wanted to see this and this gives up that gives off this vibes. And like
and if they say no, like you can't see each other, and if you're caught seeing each other,
you get in trouble.
Yeah,
and you were saying that, and it just reminded me of that, and it was kind of like, ooh, you know.
And he, like, at this point, he even starts calling himself the socialist worker god, and he'll like during sermons like literally scream up at the sky and be like, I'm addressing you, sky god, directly. If you're so powerful, send down your thunder, send down your rain.
Send down Hitler.
He's like, strike me down where I stand. And
strike me down and your path to the dark side will be complete.
And so he's like, essentially like, pleading for, like, if there's a God up there, I fucking dare you. And then when obviously nothing happens, he's proven to the entire congregation that he is the only God.
Yeah, he's like, if I drop this cup, there is a God. And he just, like, holds on to the cup forever. And they're like, oh, there is no God.
At this point, so they've adopted Agnes, that first child, and then they've adopted, like, the 2 Korean kids, and then the third one who died, and then they have 1 biological child, and they have a black kid, and they've also, like, adopted a Native American kid. And then Jim Jones is this super shitty thing. He says something to the extent of, when I see private property signs, I take them down. I trespass when I want and what I want because they stole that land from our people. I am an Indian. They stole that land from us. They raped our mothers and our sisters and our daughters. But he's in no way, shape, or form a Native American. Yeah. Like, he doesn't have Native American blood. But
he's also the whitest looking man ever. I know that
and it's literally just because he has dark hair, and his mother used to tell him that he looked like an Eskimo when he was little, so he's like, I'm Native American.
Okay, yeah, I know, like, skin tone doesn't affect things, but also, like, doesn't mean genetics, but also, like, that's so funny. He's like, you look like it. Also, why is his mom saying he looks like an Eskimo? Is it because he's, like, bundled up in his winter clothes with his little, like, nose and eyes sticking out, and his mom's like, oh, you're my little Eskimo.
Just his, like, hair color and his eye color, and he has, like, this slight, like, olive tinge to his skin that she literally,
so
like...
he's possibly Italian, and she's like, you look like an Eskimo.
When he popped out, she was literally like, you're an ugly baby Eskimo.
Jesus Christ! She's just looking at this baby, just like, this ugly baby Eskimo will never start a cult.
So anyway, he, like, claims that he's Native American several times, even though he's not. And then he also starts to, like, really woo politicians. He's starting to get in close. He's asking for political favors from time to time. He is really trying to keep the church in good standing, and all of the church members have to be nicely groomed, they have to be model citizens, and they all have to be registered to vote. He even had them bake cakes and drop them off at the doorsteps of politicians. They began to hand out baked goods so often everybody that it became a joke around town that if you haven't received a cake from the People's Temple, there was something wrong with you.
They're straight up buying politicians.
Yeah, with, like, fucking baked goods and, like, services and shit.
Yeah, and they're like, well, it's not money. We're not buying politicians. Okay.
So church members who work for the ambulance service or for the hospital dutifully told the church when any prominent person was having a medical event. This made it so that a gift would show up in a timely manner on their doorstep, and the person would wonder how Jim Jones knew they had just got back from the hospital or had a serious life event. And then Jim Jones could use that information for a future revelation. He would even have members of his congregation write letters regarding certain political issues. For example, writing congressmen a letter about certain social issues in hope to enact political change. The temple, after sending out all these letters to prominent figures, would occasionally receive a written letter back. Among these were letters from then Governor Ronald Reagan, FBI Director Herbert Hoover,
Herbert Vacuum Cleaner.
And then they also received a thank you letter from the police. And Jim Jones even got in good with the First Lady and had a private dinner with her once.
How private was this dinner? Given some of his other stuff.
Yeah, really. She wanted to see what those pissing contests were about.
She's like, are the rumors true?
He ended up donating $50 to a family of a fallen police officer. And then he also donated $250 to the city police reserves for new gear. So the police were also on his good side. They're sending him thank you letters and shit.
That's so smart. Doing skeezy, manipulative, probably illegal shit. But, like, getting the police on your good side before they discover it. So it's easier. They're not going to be looking at you for skeezy shit unless until it's too late, really.
Because really they're like, this is just this really nice, upstanding member of the community
who's on a lot of Quaaludes.
A church leader. He's making like donations. He's in good with all these political figures. Like at this point, there's nothing bad that people can point to him. Many of the members of the People's Temple worked in the law, the government, or for the sheriff's department. He even asked the sheriff's department for 20 concealed carry permits so that temple members could stand guard over any large collections of money that they collected at their church. And even though Jim Jones had very liberal ideologies and often preached socialism, he was a registered Republican who even supported President Richard Nixon. The entire congregation of the People's Temple would vote as a block, always casting their vote for whoever.
You could do a lot of damage politically with that.
Yeah, especially in small elections.
Yeah.
So Jim and the rest of the community thought that it was best that they voted for mostly Republicans, but on occasion they would vote for Democrats based on ideals. This meant a couple hundred votes to whoever the temple thought was best, which, like we were saying, could really sway an election in a small town. The temple began setting up foster homes for orphans and neglected children, except there was an instance where a child was beat with a cat of nine tails made out of metal by a temple member.
By Jim Jones.
Even if they didn't want to, the elderly people that were living in temple-funded assisted living facilities were being shuttled to the church. And when the Daily Journal would report on these instances, the writer would receive late-night phone calls, late as 2 a.m. or like midnight, from Jim Jones that kind of seemed like a threat. And when he would report...
I'm on Quaaludes and I need you to stop with the articles because I need the church and I need the money and... Do you have any drugs?
You know I'm God? I could kill you.
I could kill you, but I won't. But also, fuck you. Stop writing shit. Give me money, and here's a spider monkey. Okay, bye. Click.
And this is like a common theme, is like any time he would get any bad press whatsoever, he's out to destroy whoever wrote that's life. They would report this to the authorities, but nothing would ever come of it. And so by the mid-1970s, the church had almost 3,000 members. Most members were working class, seeking solace in the church when life was difficult. And then Jones started, because he had so many members, he started to form a church hierarchy. With all the closest people to him being his staff of 8 to 10 members, all were women, all were white, and all were college educated. These members would spy, they would gather intelligence, they would report on others.
So we just built a neighborhood of nosy Nellies, mm-hmm. Like a little community of nosy neighbors. They're like, have you ever peeped over a fence? You're hired. Also, are you hot? Hired.
And then he basically gathered what was called the planning committee. And the planning committee had people of, I think at its biggest was up to like 120 members of people that were closest to him that he would give the biggest church jobs to. But then they also got the most out of everybody in the church. Jones would basically tell the people that were staff and part of the planning committee, like, oh, I can have all of these revelations on my own, but it seeps so much energy from me that I need you to gather intel on everybody and like help out with them. Otherwise, I'm gonna like self-destruct. And so they would literally like raid through people's garbage cans looking for any classified information that they could use to report back to Jim.
I wonder if this is similar to how he was finding people's like social security numbers and information and shit.
Yeah, probably.
Before, just on a smaller, or now it's on a bigger scale.
And so Patty Cartnell, who is like, she's basically been with Jim since day one and is one of the most devout followers to him possible. And she's basically like his go-to person to keep track of all of this stuff. One day, she literally gets caught going through the garbage of another person, dressed as a black woman. She's a white woman. She dresses
blackface.
She literally does blackface, and is like, I'm like sneaking over to my boyfriend's house, is what she tells the police, and the police just let her go. They're like, okay, lady.
They're like, that makes sense why you're in blackface and you're going through someone else's garbage can. But you gave us a cake, so it's okay. We'll let you get away with blackface and crimes and shit because you made us a cake, and aren't you just a little cutie?
The planning committee members would even go as far as to disguise themselves as other people, like maintenance people, to gain entry into a house by lying. And they would take like a quick trip to the bathroom while they were in the house and gain access to people's medication cabinets where they could look at people's prescriptions, doctors' names, ailments, the dates of the prescriptions. And basically, like, gather all of this fucking information on them that literally have file systems on every single member that joined the church.
So they could be like, you know, they're at a church and they would be like, I sense that you, Thelma, have a thyroid issue or whatever.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh my God, how did you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I think Jim is prophetic.
Yeah.
At this point, they're also severely vetting anybody that wants to join the church.
To make sure nobody's like a snitch or a plant from somebody else trying to destruct them.
Yeah, because they only want people that are going to be all in and that are most likely to agree with whatever Jim Jones is saying. And the people of the planning committee were also granted special privileges over other members. For example, they were allowed to enter the church without a full body service, which basically meant that they didn't get pat down and their like purses and items didn't get taken from them as they entered the church, like everybody else would, because Jim Jones was extremely paranoid.
Because he was paranoid and because he's like, well, I don't know if you could sneak in here and shoot up the place. I've gotten so many death threats. Did you see the rock that flew in? Out in the window?
Out in the window?
Out in the window rock. Did you not see that? Somebody was clearly trying to kill me. Did you not see someone shoot at me and then give me the gun so it looked like I tried to shoot at myself? Someone's clearly trying to kill me. It could be you. We need to take all of your stuff.
And so while the other members of the church saw all these women as like snobby and bitchy, a lot of these women saw themselves as like the unsung heroes that were doing Jim's dirty work because the ends always justified the means. And Jim would also...
Just like the HOA.
Yeah, honestly. Jim would also do this trick where blood would come from his hands that was supposed to have healing powers, and he would rub it on people's like arthritic joints and their wounds to heal them. But what they didn't know was that this blood actually came from these staff members' own arms. They would give it to Jones for the purpose of healings like this.
Okay. This sounds unsafe and unsanitary, and my brain is just running through all the bloodborne pathogen training we have to do for work.
Disgusting.
There's so many diseases you don't know if you have, and that's just...
And they're just giving him his blood.
Why not use fake blood?
I don't know.
You can get fake blood so much... I can give you a recipe for fake blood.
They would even do some crazy shit where they would put on theatrical makeup.
Again with the theatrics.
And they would dress up like elderly women or sometimes elderly black women so that Jones could do a quote-unquote healing on them. Or, like, he would even do this thing where he would, like, make them drop dead and then resurrect them. And everyone thought that he was actually doing this to members.
Remember what I was joking about in the last episode with the possums?
Yeah.
The lay on hands with the possums?
So he's actually doing it now.
Yeah, but it's with people.
And this woman, Patty Cartnell, that's, like, really close to him, like, she wanted to be one of the women that was sleeping with Jim Jones so fucking bad, but he literally was like, no, you're too fat. I don't want to sleep with you. So instead...
But someone else needs to sleep with people with low insecurity. It can't be me, but buddy, take one for the team. And also, this, if she wants to be with him so bad, this is a good way to keep her, like, holding on to him.
So what he does is he's like, I won't sleep with you, but I'm going to give you a really important task. And that is to keep a list of all the people that I'm fucking and then make sure I have a schedule for all the people that I'm fucking.
So you know how many people there are. It's not you.
Yeah.
But you know how many people. But you're so important to me. And also, if you just lost a little bit of weight.
And I think maybe she was also older than he wanted to. I don't know. He was a fucking asshole.
You're just not hot enough.
Yeah, pretty much.
I need you to be at least like an 8. And you're like... a solid 4.5, maybe a 5 on a good day.
And, like, she ends up doing this. And, like, all of the church knows that she's doing this. And they end up literally calling her his fucking secretary. Because she keeps a list of all the people that he fucks. The really shitty thing is he doesn't even use condoms when sleeping with others. And ends up getting several women pregnant. And then forcing them to have abortions. Even though a lot of these women wanted to keep the children because they literally thought that they had God's blood in them because they were Jim's kids. But
I'm surprised he wasn't like, no, have that baby and sign the, like...
Yeah, well,
under the thing over to me, like with the other kid, the stone kid.
Under the guise of socialism, he's like, it's cruel for you to bring more children into this world. You wouldn't be a good socialist if you did this. You need to have an abortion.
I mean, that, I guess, is just a different form of control of instead of you need to have a kid and sign it over to me, you need to have an abortion because I say so.
Yeah, pretty much. And I, like... Who knows why he forced them to have abortions instead of just wanting more kids of his own?
Probably because the whole church is a financial, like, everybody's supporting each other financially, and they were so damn broke they couldn't afford to financially support any more kids.
Also why, like, he was pissed off when Marceline got pregnant. He would even attack Grace and be like, I can't believe you got pregnant, even though the kids... could be like mine or Tim's, but he always said it was his. He's like,
I can't believe
you should have had an abortion. He would tell Marceline she should have had an abortion because he legitimately was like,
we'll adopt 26 other kids.
Yeah, because he didn't believe in bringing children into the world. He wanted to adopt as many because he didn't mind having a family and having kids, but he thought it was like really fucked up to bring children into the world. So he was always trying to convince people to have abortions. And so when even other church members would have kids, he'd be like, that's fucked up of you. You shouldn't have gotten an abortion. And he would make him feel bad about having a kid and starting a family.
Jeez.
Yeah, he was horrible.
If you want to have your own kids, have your own kids. If you want to bring kids, if you want to adopt kids, adopt. Both have it, like, dude.
Yeah.
This man.
He's such a piece of shit.
Can I travel back in time just to bitch slap his stupid glasses off?
And of course, everyone wanted to be part of, like, this planning committee, like, his elite group of people. So they were, like, ratting each other out. They would make confessions about stuff. Jones...
Forgive me, Father, for Betsy has sinned.
Yeah, pretty much. Jones would force them to fill out questionnaires, write essays. He would keep them up at all hours of the night with his lectures, teachings, and preaching. Or he would keep them up just talking about other church members, just because he was insomniac. Everyone else didn't deserve to sleep either. He also started pseudo-psychotherapy sessions.
Gave everybody else amphetamines.
And so he started these pseudo-psychotherapy sessions, sometimes with the members one-on-one, but most of the time in front of everybody else, where he would bring up every single detail of their life, including their sex life. But
well, because their most of these people's sex life was him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But he would also, like, verbally abuse them and punish them for anything he might think they have done wrong. And because he said it was necessary for everyone to shed their egos. And if anyone stood up for a friend or colleague against Jones, they would be punished or cast out of his inner circle.
Jesus.
Yeah.
This dude, I swear, this dude.
Yeah, any sort of, like, protecting each other defied the rules and the purpose of stripping people of their egos.
We're gonna revolt against society, but you can't revolt against me.
Yeah. And a lot of it was Jim would gather these meetings and he would tell everybody to like talk about each other and rat on each other and point at each other and be assholes to each other, while most of the time he's sitting in the back doing nothing. So it makes it look like everybody's being fucking horrible to each other when he's the one orchestrating everything.
This is just the witch trials. Everybody's pointing at everybody else saying this person's doing this, that person's doing that. And it's instigated by the church. In both cases, just different forms of church and for different reasons, but they just, the less people are together, the more you can control them. That's how one person gets control, is because nobody stands together, and multiple people could overthrow one person.
Yeah.
But if you keep them pitted against each other, they'll never unite to do so.
Right.
It's a brilliant tactic, but it's...
And so he'll, like, go up to somebody. Yeah, he'll go up to somebody and be like, hey, you should bring up the fact that Grace is raising her son, John wrong. Like, she fucking sucks as a mom. And so they bring it up. And then, like, there's this one time Jim Jones faked a heart attack, saying it hurt his heart so much that Grace didn't have an abortion. And that they had a kid that was supposedly his. And it wouldn't be the only time he would fake a heart attack for sympathy. He did it, like, all the time.
He's on so many drugs. Is he actually faking these heart attacks, though?
But, like, people would rush to his aid. They gave him nitroglycerin pills and oxygen. And sometimes nurses would even take a pint of his blood to, I don't know, thin it out. And then he would remark...
that's how that works.
No, and then he would remark that if his blood were put into any sick person, they would immediately be healed. Which, like, okay, so you're, like, having all these heart attacks, and you claim you have all these physical ailments, but, like, your blood would heal a sick person?
But it won't heal me.
Yeah, fucking stupid. So...
What a doofus.
Jim always had his elite really look into new members to make sure they wouldn't have any negative reactions to Jones's sermons. Some of which he would... dance on the Bible, which would obviously upset certain people.
Again, with the musical theater. It's like tap dancing on the Bible.
Anyone who was open and really wanted to attend would have to attend 5 consecutive Sundays in a row in order to be accepted into the fold of the church as a new member. And they would even have to, like, they actually have to give you a membership card, which you need to present at the door each time.
What is this, Costco?
Yeah. It's Costco church.
Costco church, except you don't get free samples.
And then when they would be directed to join the church, they would basically have a church job where, like, they were given a certain job in the church. Or a lot of the time...
Welcome to the church. Do free labor for us.
Like, they would sometimes even convince people to, like, quit their actual jobs to, like, do stuff within the church.
Even
and basically
though
their job was the church.
Even though they're desperately in need of financial support.
They gave all their money to the church so they don't have it anyway. Jim Jones is providing for them. Like, all of these members at this point...
No, the church is in desperate need of financial support.
Yeah, he's making them...
So quit your job to do stuff for us.
Yeah, he's making them live together in a lot of instances. He's making them, like, all of, like, the kids that are going to college. He literally bought specific dormitories for them to live in so they weren't influenced by outside people in normal college dorms. They're living together. They've given up all of their jobs and their money. And if they do have a job,
nobody's
they're,
like this is a cult?
Yeah, I guess not. They're like, this is just a nice little community. Like,
we're just very protective of our own.
We love living together. Like, we're raising all the kids together. But no, like, he's taken over every single aspect of their lives. Then he started to, like, really want to expand the church. So they actually ended up setting up, like, the main base of the church in San Francisco. And they start chartering Greyhound buses out to different locations. And they would even be up to 11 Greyhound buses where he would take over 600 members with him to different areas to, like, basically poach people for his church. He even took over 600 members with him to Washington, D.C., where they cleaned Capitol grounds in Washington, and then the newspaper said that they were some of the most delightful tourists they had ever seen. But of course, the positive reviews could have been due to the fact that Jim Jones donated large amounts of money towards press freedom campaigns.
Yeah.
During these trips, a collector on each bus would keep demanding money from them while on the road, while it was... Sometimes he would tell them it was an elevated toll bill, or they claimed the bus needed to be repaired, even if it didn't, just to collect money from people on the bus.
We lost a sock. We need $20 from each of you.
Yeah, pretty much. And it got to the point where temple members were competing for how much they could donate. Even people that were on welfare were happy to give everything that they had to the temple. And the temple donations were coming in from all over the continental United States. They had a mailing service that would send out 30 to 50,000 letters to anyone who had gone to a service, responded to temple newsletters, or responded to a temple radio show. They sold bottles of oil supposedly blessed by Jones, and even published fake quotes from physicians saying that they worked. They even said that the leaders from the Disciples of Christ were saying that his healing were miracles. And Jack Beam, who we mentioned earlier in the first episode.
With Jim Beam.
Right.
Or Jack Daniels.
He gave a testimony saying that one time during a car accident, he was fully decapitated. But upon looking at a dashboard photo of Jim Jones, he was made whole again. So they started selling framed photos of Jim Jones.
Okay. And everybody was like, okay, but he had like a wrinkle on his neck, and he was like, see, that's the scar. That's
where
the scar
I was
from
decapitated.
it. I was fully decapitated, and that's why my voice sounds like this, and that's why I always lose my head in a crisis.
So they began selling framed photos of Jim Jones for $5 a piece, and they received many more testimonies about how a simple photo of Jim Jones had healed or saved them, and it kept the money rolling in. They even sold different photos of him for different ailments. One was supposed to ward off fire, one was supposed to ward off assault, and one was even supposed to ward off cancer.
For me, when I see a picture of Jim Jones, it makes me violently ill. So, I don't think it's working how it's supposed to.
This picture of him on my cup, it's supposed to ward off cancer.
It's supposed to ward off dehydration.
They were even selling literal scraps of cloth that they said were like part of his robes, even though they were just random pieces of cloth. And it got to the point where they could literally sell thousands of dollars worth of merchandise in one day.
So there's this band from around here that will, as a joke, will sign stuff and sell it, and then people will buy it as a joke. It gives off that energy, but seriously instead of jokingly. Like, they would be like, shit, what else can we bless? This roll of toothpaste, this empty toilet paper tube, this, I just say roll of toothpaste, this tube of toothpaste, this empty toilet paper roll, Let's bless this chapstick. Your shoe. Here, quick, give me your shoe. Let's bless it and sell it for $50. Like, it gives off that energy.
Yeah, like, he's just basically scamming people. He's selling, like, these shitty prints of him and making thousands of dollars.
It's like a crayon doodle he did because they ran out of printer ink. That's just, like, sunglasses and a smiley face and a little preacher collar. And it says, Jim Jones. And one of the J's is backwards.
He started actually saying that he wanted to spend his money to buy like airplanes, boats, and bulletproof cars. And he even said that he wanted some of his members to go get pilot's licenses. Obviously, because his paranoia is at all-time high and his drug use is still constant at this point. There was one time he took 11 buses of his church members to his hometown, and when one of the buses stopped in the town of Lynn to ask for directions, they happened upon Don Foreman, Jim Jones's childhood friend.
What a full circle moment. And he was like, everybody get off the bus, let me tell you a story.
No, he should have. But they were like, hello, sir, can you give us directions? We're looking for the birthplace of God. That's what they asked him. And Don replied, you'll have to tell me who God is. And when they responded, Jim Jones, Don literally was like, here's where his childhood home is. And then basically like laughed to himself the rest of the way to work. What a fucking crazy thing. I can't believe that Jim started this church and these people think he's God.
He's like, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, I have to go to work.
Yeah, and so he's just like chuckling to himself like, oh, that's fucking crazy. But obviously he didn't know how this was going to end up, or maybe he would have stopped them.
Yeah. I mean, I personally, if someone did that with someone that I knew, I would have been like, just so shocked. Wouldn't have known what to do.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you're just like, what the fuck? And then you just move on with your life. You're just like, well, that happened anyways.
Oh, and so, Caroline Layton, the woman that he's sleeping with, I guess she's not divorced from her husband at this point. Like, her and her husband are still married. And so he literally goes to her husband and convinces him to divorce
Jim
Carolyn.
Does?
Yeah. And is like, I'm going to give you this other really hot woman named Karen for you to sleep with in exchange for you divorcing your wife so I can continue to fuck her.
I'll trade you your wife for this other woman who's not my wife, but here, have her.
Yeah, basically.
She knows how to ask for the manager.
And so, like, apparently this was fine with Caroline's husband because he ends up really liking Karen. They start having sex and they end up getting married. But, of course, Jim not only convinced this man to divorce his first wife, but he starts sleeping with Karen, his second wife, who he has given to this man as a so-called gift.
Power move. I don't mean that in a good way. That is a manipulative ass power move.
And then he decides to do a little switcheroo and he's like, too many people want to have sex with me. I'm having sex all of the time. I
need somebody to take the burden off of me again. Where's Tim Stone when you need him?
And so basically he decides that he's going to try and force abstinence on everybody in the church.
Okay, is everybody... I mean, I know people think he's God, so that's part of it. But also, is he just making this shit up and assaulting everybody? Or is he, like, convincing people he is God and that, like... You want God to find you attractive.
There are legitimately a ton of women who, like, want to sleep with him at this point. But there are also several instances where he most definitely is raping some women. And
Not
just
surprised,
claiming that, like, because there's at one point where he's like, I'm coming on to these women so they don't feel guilty for coming on to me. Yeah. And, like, I'm helping with their self-esteem. And I'm, like, the most, like, wonderful lover ever.
Their mouths are saying no, but their eyes are saying yes.
Exactly.
Because I'm a scumbag.
And around this time is when he begins to claim that he's the only heterosexual person to exist, claiming that everyone else in the temple was a latent homosexual who hadn't come to terms with themselves.
Happy Pride!
And he started to force his members to admit to homosexual instances in their past, thoughts of homosexuality, etc.
Have you ever looked at a man? You're gay. Have you ever looked at a woman? You're gay. Have you ever thought, man, I'm glad my wife can open up a pickle jar on her own? Gay!
That's gay.
Have you, as a woman, ever walked into a hardware store? Gay!
And so he even forced people to list all of their previous sexual partners and the type of sex that they had. He even asked male children in the church to fill out a questionnaire about their sexual feelings for Father Jones. Fucking creep. So now he's also, like, borderline a pedophile. And, of course, he started having sex with men in the church. But it wasn't because he was a homosexual.
It's because they're a homosexual and I'm God.
Yeah, it's because he wanted to prove their own sexuality to them. Even a hug or a kiss between same-sex members of the church that was simply friendly was often labeled as being queer and was often criticized or even punished.
Queer for any.
One time, Jim even tricked Tim Stone into going to buy women's underwear, claiming that he had transvestite tendencies, and got his wife Grace to rat him out when she found the underwear.
Because it couldn't be for Grace or anybody else that he's sleeping with to relieve the burden from Jim Jones?
Pretty much.
Okay.
And then he also always had to be the most manly man, so he would specifically seek out the straightest, most masculine men of the church to have sex with. He would always get to be the top, and then he would, like, make sure to fully satisfy them so that they were, like, humiliated and guilty afterwards about the sexual pleasure that they had felt having anal sex with another man.
What?
Yeah. So, like, he's, like, getting off on literally making the straightest men possible gay.
That sounds pretty gay to me. I'm sorry. That sounds pretty gay to me.
And so, like, what's weird to me is, like, he's not seen at all by church members as being a sexual predator. Which is, like, this is being a sexual predator. Like, this is what it is. But they instead saw him as this kind and giving man who would sacrifice a piece of himself to anyone who asked.
He just hates it so much because he's straight and you're not. But he's doing it for you so you can realize, like...
And he starts to adopt this policy of, I'm allowed to have sex with everyone. Everyone's allowed to have sex with me. But if you're going to have sex with somebody else, it has to be, like, sanctioned sex. And if it wasn't, they either had to hide it or they had to remain abstinent. Okay. There were actually several stories the church would tell about Jim's amazing sexual therapy. Where, like, there was this instance of a suicidal woman who Jim's wife, like, literally Marceline suggested that Jim sleep with to make her better so she wouldn't be suicidal anymore.
It's that roof pissing dick. It's the magic of the roof pissing dick.
When Caroline's younger sister, who had just graduated high school, joined the temple, Jim slept with her because he said she was suicidal and even said that it was Caroline who had suggested it.
He's just throwing the word suicidal around at this point, isn't he?
He's claiming that everybody's suicidal or homosexual.
Also,
like, that's the dichotomy.
We should put a trigger warning on this episode.
Yeah, honestly.
At some point. But also, like, if you know vaguely anything about the story of Jim Jones and
then you would
Jonestown,
understand.
it's kind of inherently implied.
Members of the church would even claim that if there was a traitor of the church, if Jones slept with him, they would be magically cured and, like, be in the inner circle. And he even forced himself on some people, but claimed he only did it so they didn't feel guilty asking for sex with him.
That's what you were saying earlier.
Yeah. But he could tell that they wanted him. Some were in love with him, some got jealous, and in order to keep jealousy down, he slept with as many as he could. One time, 16 in a day, to make sure he shared the love with everybody. He was communal property.
That sounds exhausting.
Yeah. Because he's not using condoms either.
The amount of... And then, so he's doing that. You know what? I was going to say something. You know, I said something about the blood healing earlier. None of that matters. Because this shit. This is a gross man who should have been stopped a long time ago.
Yeah. Disgusting. He's fucking disgusting. Okay, he would even force all of his sexual partners to stand up and sing his praises. Basically, like, they had to tell people how good of a sexual partner he was.
They're like, he can piss over a whole roof.
But
do you believe it? Just let your imagination go wild with that one.
So, there's, like, up to 120 members of the planning committee. He's sleeping with almost all of them. But guess who he doesn't sleep with?
Carola.
The black people.
Oh. I was going to say that one, the one girl he said was fat.
Yeah, he doesn't want to sleep with Patty because she's fat, but he doesn't want to sleep with the black people because he claims it's because white people have forced their sexuality onto black people for so long that he doesn't want to, like, take part in that. Sure, it's not because you're, like, secretly racist,
I'll sleep with anybody who's not fat, black, Tim, Patty.
Which is, like, at least these people were spared. Like, honestly, good for them, because at least they were spared from, like, the sexual advances of shitty-ass Jim Jones. And then Caroline ends up pregnant with Jim's son. He forces her to marry another man in the church so the child can take his name, and then is like, that child's not mine, but Caroline should have gotten an abortion. Fuck you, Caroline, but then continue sleeping with her.
But this other child that may or may not be mine. Definitely mine.
And then one of the school teachers of the nearby school who taught many of the temple kids was, like, really worried about abuse happening within the temple.
I wonder why.
Yeah, Stephen Jones would refer to his own father as him instead of dad. One girl begged to have her grade changed to an A so she wasn't whipped in front of the church. And some students claimed that on bus trips, they had been, like, the buses were so overcrowded that they have been stuck in the luggage compartments of the bus while traveling.
Jeez.
One time, Jim Jones even dropped the kids off at 11 p.m. in a canyon and made the kids find their way home as survival training. And when they came back with scrapes and bruises, they told the teacher that it was from wrestling in some bushes. But she finally got the truth from them, and so she confronted Jones, and he basically just said, it won't happen again, while never fully admitting to it.
Jeez. What a character.
Yeah. And then on these bus trips, he also does, like, this absolute unhinged thing, where, like, he hires 2 drivers for each bus, and one driver, like, literally sleeps in the luggage compartment while the other one drives, and then they swap off so the bus never has to stop because he does not believe in making stops.
I'm on speed, so this church needs to be speedy too.
Yeah. He starts to become even more paranoid. They set up fences with barbed wire around the temple, floodlights. They had security guards, and they would follow anybody that drove past the church. They got a chimpanzee named Mr. Muggs, who they put a guard tower for outside of the church. They had dozens of armed guards dressed in black, wearing berets. Jones always had multiple bodyguards on him, and at one point...
Multiple Barbie guards, did you say?
Multiple bodyguards on him at any point in time. And then at one point, they had stockpiled over 200 guns. And they always had an armed guard for each bus that they were taking. And this chimpanzee, Mr. Muggs, of course, because he just can't stop collecting, like, fucking random animals at this point.
This is a different chimpanzee
like different
from
animal.
The other one.
Yeah.
And then from the second chimpanzee.
Yeah, so this is another chimpanzee named Mr. Muggs that they got. And apparently, like, he was really abusive to Mr. Muggs. The abuse got so bad to the point where, like, another member of the church was like, I'll just adopt this monkey and he can still be the church's monkey, but maybe you shouldn't live with Jim Jones. Basically,
let me guess, Jim Jones was like, that's my goddamn monkey.
He was, like, diaper trained, but Jim Jones would just let Mr. Muggs go to the bathroom wherever he wanted. Mr. Muggs had behavioral issues, and then anytime Mr. Muggs wouldn't behave like a human, Jim would either berate him or, like, straight up beat him.
Oh, no, this animal is behaving like an animal.
Yeah.
The fuck?
And so he's, like, doing all this crazy shit for security reasons around the church. But there weren't enough real attacks to keep the People's Temple worried. So Jones kept on orchestrating events. One day, 2 dogs at the church...
another rock throughout the window.
One day, 2 dogs at the church were poisoned. Lynetta Jones, Jim Jones's mother, gave a speech about how they died in pain and agony in a cruel and violent way, and in search for some safety crawled all the way back to the temple to die. Other times they heard random gunshots. Jones would have fake heart attacks.
It's just Jim Jones out in the yard with, like, 2 pistols on all of the drugs. Just like,
shooting up the place. He would tell about threatening phone calls he was receiving. There was another time that a temple dog was found hung with a spike through its neck.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's too much. Leave the dogs out of this.
Some of these instances were reported to the sheriff, but most of them were not. Probably because they were faked.
Were they reported... Wait, did these things actually happen, or were these just stories they were telling?
No, like, these are things that actually happened.
The temple is making these things happen.
They think that Jim Jones was, like, doing it himself or having close temple members do them, and then they wouldn't even report them to the police because the police would find out that it wasn't real.
So, who is reporting it to the police? The temple or people outside of the temple?
I think there are a couple instances where they wanted to report, where, like, the actual temple themselves reported it to the police, just so that they could say that they were reporting some of the instances to make it seem like a bigger deal, because they wanted, like, not only the people in the community to think that they were being attacked, they wanted everybody to think that they were being attacked. Members started noticing issues with their cars. Like, a tire was about to fall off, their steering wheel won't turn correctly.
And it's all because they didn't pray for 2 minutes beforehand.
And, yeah, because Jones was literally able to predict every single one of those instances. Want to know why? Probably because he fucked with their cars. But, of course, no one ever suspected Jim of orchestrating these attacks, for this was the man who had severed the tendon of his pinky when fighting for the rights of a black man in Indiana.
He severed...
Yeah.
He just, like, I imagine him doing, like, a little sissy fight, like, leave him alone!
And no one
my pinky!
Like, he would literally hold his pinky weird, because he would claim that he was fighting for the life of the black man, and he, like, severed the tendon of his pinky doing this. And it became, like, such, like, a popular story that the temple children would start holding their pinky in the way that Jim Jones would hold his around the church.
He's just, like, trying to be British. Just holding his pinky out to be fancy.
And there was...
Gotta readjust my chair.
Oh, yep.
I've sat weird for too long. I need to readjust and sit weird a different way. Alrighty.
So there was even one instance where the church was all gathered for a meeting, and they heard gunshots come from the bushes.
And then Jim Jones walked out of the bushes?
No, and Jim Jones, like, falls to the ground, and blood starts gushing from his chest. And they're like, oh my god, Jim Jones was shot.
But it was some of the fake blood someone gave him that he, like, pierced or something?
They were about to run into the forest from where, like, the shooter was, but Jim Jones was like, no, run that way. I saw him run that way, and points them in the opposite direction. And so all the church members listen to him and go the opposite direction. The closest members to him, like the staff members who were, like, nurses, shuttle Jim into like a room in the church. And then he comes back out holding the bloody shirt, but has no bullet hole. And he's like, look, I healed myself. I healed my gunshot wound. Look, here's the shirt. The shirt has a hole in it. The shirt has blood on it.
He would have been such a good actor. He should have been on Broadway. Put this man on Broadway, not in a cult. Don't let him make a cult. Let him make a Broadway show, please.
And then he confesses, he's like, I sent you in the opposite direction of the attacker because I didn't want you to hurt the attacker because I knew that I could heal myself.
Oh, I thought he was going to say I didn't want you guys to get hurt. But that's okay.
Yeah. But he's, like, such a good person. He doesn't want any harm to come to anyone.
Even someone who shot him.
Someone had harmed him. And so, like, people are, like, so happy that Jim Jones hadn't died. They're, like, crying for joy. And they even put his bloody shirt on display in the temple. But one service, the police came knocking to inquire about the shooting. And they were like, hey, we need to collect this shirt as evidence.
And they're like, it's a holy artifact.
And basically, like, Jim Jones immediately got rid of the shirt. They just stopped putting it on display, disappeared. Jim Jones was like, what shirt?
Conveniently, somebody dropped a cigarette on it while it was on the wall. They, like, flicked a cigarette at it. Whoops.
That was that. There wasn't any real investigation into it. And he started doing the thing where he started dressing up some of his bodyguards as himself so that if there was another attempted assassination that they would take the bullet instead of him. But these people began to wonder if Jones was so self-sacrificing and he was able to heal his own wounds, why is he forcing other people to take a bullet for him?
And also, if he can heal himself and them.
Bro. Technically, he still has a church, nursing homes, other buildings in, like, connected. He still technically has his Indianapolis branch open.
But his brain is nowhere to be found.
But there's this one instance where he went back to the Indianapolis church to preach and conduct a healing. And the Indianapolis Star reported an article of skepticism against him, claiming that the cancers that he was pulling out of people's bodies weren't real. And they wanted to get them tested at a lab to see if it was actual cancer. And he said not only would the church board frown upon this, he was like, oh, I would love to do that, but the church board wouldn't allow me to do that. Because, like, any time that anyone criticizes him, he blames it on, like, the church board, on, like, his board members.
And also, it wouldn't be safe for you to handle somebody's cancer. That's biohazardous material.
Yeah. But, and then he also claimed that his enemies would most likely swap out the real cancer for something fake, only to discredit him. But after this level of skepticism, in his own home state of Indiana, Jim Jones was wounded and decided to permanently close his church in that section of the U.S. And all other temple-related activities in Indiana were permanently closed. So, like, the nursing homes that he set up, like, the soup kitchen, all of that, he just shuts it down.
Everybody who's relying on that is now just up the creek with no paddle.
Yeah, pretty much. And this is around the time when journalist Ken Solving decides to start an investigation on the church. when he starts his investigation, the church literally sets up picket lines, and Jones started instructing his congregation to buy all of the volumes of the articles he's publishing within that area so that nobody else can read them.
Jeez.
And eventually the people pushes so hard back against bad press coverage, and they also start donating to like the freedom of press shit, that Ken Solving is basically like forced to stop publishing his articles. So it was going to be like a 7-part series. He published 3 out of the 7-part series before like he finally had to back off.
We believe in freedom of press, but
unless it's bad press
against us, and then no, we can't have that.
Yeah.
Freedom of all press that says Jim Jones is good and a gift from God, which he is God. He is a gift to us.
Yeah, and any other journalist that like wanted to report on Jim Jones, like there was this one journalist that met with Jim Jones, wanted to meet with Jim Jones, who wanted to report on his fake healings, and he ended up giving his phone number out to Jim Jones for a possible interview, but unfortunately this led to him and his family being continuously harassed day and night on the phone by temple members, to the point where they left for 3 days to get away, and they came back and the phone was still going off constantly. Jeez. Until they were finally like, okay, we're not going to fucking publish anything. Please just leave us alone. They ended up going to the police about it, and the police were like...
For harassment.
Yeah, but the police didn't do anything about it.
The police were like, they gave us all cakes. What do you want?
And so they were like, essentially the risks outweigh the rewards. We're just not going to fucking publish stories on this guy. And it would take another 5 years before they tried to report on the People's Temple again, except the next time they would do it, the stakes would be much higher. So Ken Solving, since he was the main examiner, was ruthlessly under attack by the People's Temple. His house was broken into, and the only things that were stolen were his check stubs and copies of his newspaper articles. Newspaper articles?
He's Pope News.
Newspaper articles.
Newspaper papal.
Church members would investigate him and his family members, and he had a harder time finding work with so many People's Temple members constantly going against him and trying to dig up dirt on his name. Jim's also doing really fucked up shit. He's not only verbally humiliating people, like church members, especially the ones closest to him, he also started humiliating them by giving them spankings. It started with a belt, but moved to a special paddle called the Board of Education. The spankings would get so severe that some needed medical attention. And then he even started instigating physical fights between members, sometimes putting one member up against several other members to ensure that this member was beaten up, humiliated, and taught a lesson. Sometimes they would fight naked. Sometimes the pairings were extremely unfair.
Gay. Remember, he's not gay. This man is just sick and twisted and is trying to get his twisted fantasies and control fantasies out on everybody in any way he possibly can.
Yeah. And he even told this one man, this young man who had just joined the church, he goes up to him and basically says, I'll fuck you in the ass if you want me to. And this man is like, no, thank you. And so politely declines. This same man later escapes the cult and is a lot of the reason that we have the information that we have today about this shit.
Good for this guy for getting out.
Yeah. And then also around this time, he started doing and this is really important, he started doing what he called poison tests, where he would give juice to the members, make them all drink it, and then after they had drank it, he would tell them that there was poison in it just to see their reaction.
He does a lot of, I'm just doing this to see your reaction. It's just a prank, bro.
Yeah, and then he would be like,
it's a social experiment.
Kidding. It's okay. Ha 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 ha. Ha ha ha.
Ha 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 ha. It's just a social experiment, bro. Deal with it. It's all chill, bro.
Then we're going to talk about Jim Cobb. Because Jim Cobb at this point, his family is extremely close. They have been with Jim nearly from the beginning when he started his church. Yeah, from Jim Jones. Nearly from the beginning when he started his church in Indiana. Then they followed him out to California. Jim Cobb and his mother were invested in the People's Temple, but Jim Cobb's father, on the other hand, while he helped out with the church on occasion and allowed his wife and his son to engage in church activities, he never really believed in the mission of the People's Temple. And the church chastised him for drinking too much. They attacked him for having any other little thing that they deemed he had done wrong. And Jones, seeing that he was the only member of the Cobb family that he couldn't crack, wanted him gone. One night, he had a night guard from the People's Temple go to Jim Cobb's house, grab Jim Cobb's father by the ankles, throw him out of his own house because it was actually owned by the church. And they basically told him, like, get your black ass out of here. And then when Jim Cobb returned...
But they're not racist.
Yeah, right. And then when Jim Cobb returned, the guards told him that his father was drunk and threatened to harm his own family, like kill him and his mother. And the temple had thrown him out because they were worried for Jim and his mother's safety, as well as the safety for the temple as a whole. And then Jim Jones requested that young Jim Cobb meet with him, and then ended up asking, are you willing to kill your father? And Jim Cobb was like, no, I'm not going to fucking kill my dad, but I'll make sure he doesn't cause harm to anyone. And this sent him into, like, this massive state of confusion because his dad was a good husband, a good father, treated him with respect, never missed a day of work, had never been violent. He knew he wouldn't do this. And, like, he ended up, like, getting clarification from his dad, realized that all of it was bullshit, and at the start of dentistry school, decided to leave the People's Temple for good.
Good for him.
He also thought it was really fucking BS that all of the people close to Jim were all of these white people, that he was preaching all this equality, but all the people that he was sleeping with were white, all the people he was giving power to were white.
But like, he's not racist because there's that one black minister, remember?
Right, exactly.
I'm not racist. Also, I have a black son. Remember, I'm not racist.
And he's like, basically,
you're racist.
Jones is a hypocrite and a liar. But this also meant that Jim Cobb was going to have to leave his family because they were part of the church. Like, he was married at this point. He had to leave his wife at the church. He had to leave his mom at the church. He had to leave his sister at the church because that's the only way that you could get out. And so he was in dentistry at this time. And 7 other young people that were kind of in college or just like had been in college and were trying to be independent thinkers decided that they had had enough of the church. And they would end up being called the Gang of 8, and they would end up defecting from the church.
That's got to be so hard. That's like basically growing up in that being your whole life, and then making the decision to leave, and then being persecuted by said family, like perceived family for it.
Yeah.
It's got to be rough, but really good for them for getting out.
Yeah. One young man in this group was worried that Jones would come at them, and he really did. Like,
well, he did that to other people.
Yeah, Jones did things like suggest that like one of the members had slept with a 14-year-old girl, saying he was compensating for his homosexuality. This gang basically like take a couple of the temple cars. They even take a couple of the temple guns to protect themselves, and they like go out on the road, and they're just booking across state lines, like trying to get away from Jim Jones and the People Temple. And Jim Jones even goes as far to like he sends out like a search party. He even rents a plane that one of his like temple members flies to go look for the Gang of 8, and he's trying to like get them back. He's telling their family all these like lies about them, about how horrible they are, and like so he's like simultaneously trying to get them back and also making them seem like these horrible traitors. And he's basically out to like ruin their lives and their entire futures. He's like, no matter where you go, I'm going to find you and I'm going to ruin your life unless you come join the church again. They write him a letter with all of their grievances saying like, not all of them can agree that Jim Jones is the problem. So how they phrase it is they're basically like, hey, we don't agree with like the hierarchy of the church. We feel like the members of the planning committee are doing a lot wrong. Like, I don't like how they're lying about people. I don't like how they're basically claiming that everyone's homosexual. Yeah. And they basically like beg him to not ruin their lives or their reputation. And they said, like, even though he preached socialism, he didn't understand it at all. Jim Jones immediately went on the defense. That could go for a lot of people. Yeah, he's immediately going in defense of this. And even the Gang of 8 was quoted to say, all the planning committee does is call each other homosexuals, asking if each other sucks cocks, and plant dope on people. What is their contribution to socialism? They felt like they had to attack the planning committee. And because, like, while some people like Jim Cobb believed that Jim Jones was the issue, others believed that Jim was still a genuinely good person and wanted to follow him, but believed that his advisors within the planning committee were corrupting him and his decision-making.
Well, I think he's corrupting them, and I think some of them might have already been a little bit twisted, but I think he was if they weren't already a little twisted, he was twisting them further.
Yeah.
And I think that energy was all just playing off of each other. It was a real, like, spiral situation, you know, blowing up each other's emotions and feelings and stuff.
And so, like, they literally ended up having to lure Jim Jones to, like, one of the temple members' houses and hold him at gunpoint and basically make him promise to, like, stop with the defamation and, like, leave them alone. Jim agrees to leave them alone, but, like, after, like, this Gang of Eight debacle, Jim Jones would now force each of his members to sign these blank pieces of paper so that he could write any statement on it that he, like, wanted to say about that person.
That's what I was asking about earlier.
Yeah, and make it look that they had signed the letter admitting to something. He even made parents admit to abusing their children on signed documentation so that he could use it against them in the future if he need to. He made a lot of these individuals afraid to leave the church or afraid to do anything other than what Jim Jones told them to do. And then also, like, Stephen Jones is having such a hard fucking time just in his life in general.
Oh, this poor kid.
Yeah, he feels absolutely invisible to his father. He has to share his dad because everyone's calling his dad father. He's basically like, you know, he has multiple partners. He's adopted all these kids. He's also taken care of other people's kids and, like, all these elderly individuals. Like, his dad is basically stretched thin. In order to, like, gain any sort of attention from his father, he ends up taking a bunch of his dad's drugs and trying to commit suicide by overdosing.
This poor kid. Let me guess, his dad gets mad at him for, oh, this is your fault. Where have I gone? You know, finding a way to twist it like he's twisted every other fucking thing in this whole situation.
Yeah. And obviously, like, his suicide was not successful. Later on, he would say this was just a cry for help. Like, I didn't know what to do to get my dad's attention. Like, I was his own biological son, and he didn't give a fucking shit about me.
Yeah, I feel so bad for this kid.
Yeah, his life is pretty fucked up. And then, because, do you know about the 1974 Patricia Patty Hearst case?
Yes, I do.
So, for those of you who don't know, Patty Hearst was the granddaughter of newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst, who was kidnapped from her apartment in Berkeley, California by members of the Symbionese Liberation Army, the SLA. The SLA, a radical left group, held her for 2 months, during which she reportedly became disillusioned with her previous life and joined the group, even participating in a bank robbery. Of course, Jones had to get involved during this time when she was kidnapped. He spoke to church members as if he was pro-SRA, claiming that sometimes terrorism was necessary and that the wealthy should watch their backs. But when he spoke to the police...
Isn't he super wealthy at this point, though?
Pretty much.
So...
But when he spoke to the police, he made it known that he disliked this organization and didn't agree with them. And in order to meet some of the demands, basically this terrorist organization said that they wanted $2 million worth of food and support for impoverished individuals. So the People's Temple ended up donating $2,000 to the Hearst family for this cause. But the intelligence division thought this was a little, like, sus, and the anti-terrorist department reported that they had even seen possible members of this terrorist organization at the People's Temple.
Interesting.
But they never had concrete evidence that supported it, that he, like, supported the kidnapping and the terrorist organization. So, like, nothing ended up coming of it. So at one point in time, Jones actually had a run-in with the police when, like, they had received several reports that there was this strange man in the bathroom of a movie theater trying to solicit sex from other men. And so they basically sent an undercover cop in who went into the restroom.
And it was Jones?
And it was Jones who, like, started approaching this undercover cop, like, jerking himself off, approaching him, making obvious advances. Jones was arrested, but then after he was arrested, the urologist argued that he was doing it for a medical issue. But the cop was like, no, that was definitely sexual.
Yeah, and he's not gay, remember?
Right. When the case arrived in court, charges were dismissed at the request of the city attorney's office, though it's not known the reason for this.
And this is why we give cakes to politicians. We give cakes to politicians.
But he did sign a probable cause document saying that the police had a reason for their arrest. This was basically like to save the police's ass so that no one could say that they were like falsely accusing him of anything. Tim Stone actually went and argued for him to have his records sealed, keeping them from prying eyes, but he was told only minors qualified to have their records sealed, and each request was denied. However, without notifying the prosecution and without a court recorder present, Judge Stromwald, who was the judge presiding over the case, had all the records sealed and destroyed. He also ordered all law agencies and the police to get rid of their records on Jones.
Jim Jones has everybody in his goddamn pocket.
Which is something nearly unprecedented in the history of sex crimes in the town. Tim Stone went around to the records offices to ensure that they were complying, but the police ended up filing an internal complaint about this.
The one time I agree with what the police are doing.
Yeah. This ended up starting like years-long legal battle over the records inside, and they remained in existence until the fall of 1977, but by then Jones had already moved abroad and had bigger fish to fry. This is basically just all of the crazy shit that's happening as he's like started this California branch of his church. But he starts to decide that he wants to get everybody out of the U.S. and he wants a mass exodus to Guyana. Not only because it was like a poor country that wasn't often traveled to, but it was also a socialist country with black leaders. And so when he decides to move the People's Temple to Guyana, next to Brazil and Venezuela.
He keeps going to Brazil for...
So he like visits, and they're like, you know, being a poor country, they're like, this rich church is going to move here, start a community. Basically,
this is great.
Like, they're like going to give him this land that they can do agriculture on because that'll like boost the agriculture in their community. And so he decides he's literally going to uproot his church and move it to Guyana. And that is like the third chapter of this whole Jim Jones spiel, and where we're going to pick up for next time.
Thank you for listening. If you liked it, please rate the podcast and share it with the weird people in your life. Follow us on Instagram at whataboutweird.pod, where we often share pictures related to the episode. If you have any topic suggestions or personal weird stories, please DM us or email us at whataboutweirdpod@gmail.com. And always remember,
there's no escape.
No mercy. All weird.